Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Be the Church podcast, where we are engaging in conversations that will encourage you to live out your faith in everyday context so that you can be the church. I'm your producer, Isaiah.
I'm one of your hosts, Kevin.
And I'm your other host, David.
And today we have a special interview with Scott Bielinski. Welcome, Scott.
Yeah, so Scott is actually my buddy, so I'm going to take some time to introduce him a little bit. Scott lives in Arkansas, a great state, as they would call it in Arkansas. He is a seminary student. He loves to read, has a great family, great dog, beautiful dog.
What kind of dog?
She is well, thanks for having me, guys. She is a lab husky mix.
Very cute. I get videos.
Are you in the part of Arkansas where there's nothing right across the bridge from Memphis? Or are you in the part of Arkansas where there's actually civilization?
No, there's a lot of civilization. So I'm in Northwest Arkansas.
Okay.
So you're
Which
near
is
the Walmart
great.
headquarters.
That's exactly right.
Cultured man.
I once
He's
went
very
to
cultured.
I went to the Walmart
Arkansas
Museum,
culture,
actually.
insane.
Yeah. So that's on the
And
Bentonville
Walton.
Square.
Yeah, no.
When did you go there?
A couple years ago. in the
Did you
summer.
also by chance stop at the Onyx Coffee Lab that's right nearby?
I did not.
Are you not a fan of coffee?
I'm not.
That was going to be my next point. Scott is like a coffee connoisseur.
Mm-mm.
Very.
Is it
I don't even
connoisseur
like-
or snob? Which term do you
I would-
prefer?
Well, it depends on the audience.
Yeah.
True.
I
It
would
sounds
say,
like with you guys, it'll be snob.
I would say with the lay folk as myself, you're more of a connoisseur. You're not over the top with how good you like coffee to be. But I feel like if I was a coffee maker, you'd probably I'd be like, relax, my guy. But no, long story short, Scott is in seminary. And so when we were all discussing people we would like to interview and that we thought would be helpful to the church, I brought up the idea of interviewing him because I think he's someone who is, filling a space where others in the church might be leaning towards that direction. So getting some input from him would be helpful. And then someone that I think overall is navigating that well. So I'm very intrigued to hear from you today. So yeah, that's my friend, Scott Bielinski.
Yeah, well, it's a joy to have you guys on here. If not just to get to see David. I haven't seen David in a while, so as long as I get to see him, I'm happy.
I know deep down you meant to say Isaiah.
Did I not just say Isaiah?
Yeah, exactly. But very nice.
So
Scott,
things are not starting off well.
David didn't give us an actual ton of information about you other than that you live in Arkansas and you have a dog. Anything else exciting you'd like to share about yourself?
So the reason David and I know each other is because he is very close friends with, kind of grew up with the woman who is my wife. And that's how David and I met, was when I traveled down to meet his family, who's very close to Anna. Anna is my wife's name, to Anna. And so when I traveled down in 2015 to meet Anna's father and her kind of second family, which is David's family, that's when David and I met and became friends. So I've been married to Anna for a little over 4 years. We actually just passed the 4-year mark about 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago tomorrow. And yeah, that's it. I'm a member at University Baptist Church in Fayetteville, and I have been so for about 10 years. When I moved to Fayetteville from Texas to study at the University of Arkansas, and I've been here ever since.
Cool.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing.
What did you study at University of Arkansas?
I studied English and communication.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good skills to have today.
Scott also reads like 150 books a year, which upsets me.
That's a lot of books.
I do not read 150
Blows
books.
you out of the water.
Yeah, it makes my Goodreads just seem so disappointing.
Yeah.
I
So
love Goodreads. If anyone wants to follow me on Goodreads, I'll be your friend. That's like the only social media I have. So
Yeah.
Can we call that social media?
Yeah. Well,
We do
David
now.
views Goodreads as a competition between other people and how many books he's read versus
That's
them.
not true.
Actually,
David, that's the wrong way to use Goodreads, man.
That's not true. I see it as a place to find way too many books that I can't even afford and or read in my lifetime.
Yeah, that's unfortunately how it works sometimes too.
So now that we've gotten to know Scott, we'll kind of get into our main topic then. I realized I didn't say this at the start. We are interviewing to talk about seminary and specifically what it's like to be in seminary and maybe some things to process through as Scott is currently in seminary. And, we'll even get some perspective from Kevin, who has been in seminary in the past. So with that, Scott, if you want to just start, where are you going to seminary right now?
Yeah, so I'm currently a Master of Divinity student at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. So I started that program in 2021 and am doing it online and have been kind of slowly chipping away at it while working a full-time job for the last 2 years.
Very cool.
what made you decide to enroll in seminary, and what degree path are you pursuing within that MDiv?
Yeah, so Southern offers a lot of concentrations, and the one I'm doing is Christian ministry, which is it's the broadest degree program. So it allows you to maximize whichever electives you want to take. So most people, when taking that, will fill up on the languages, Greek and Hebrew, and they'll do a lot of Greek or Hebrew exegesis classes just to bone up on the languages, or they'll take whichever electives they want to do. The reason why I chose that one was to thinking about boning up on the languages and maximizing my facility with the languages, since I have absolutely no facility with the languages currently. But the reason why I went to seminary was because my pastors encouraged me to think about pursuing pastoral ministry, and they see this as one of the steps along the path towards pastoral ministry. So I'm a big proponent of church pastors and churches raising up pastors. Seminaries don't make pastors, but they can help pastors be better pastors. So my original reason for seminary was at the behest of my pastors that I submit to.
So I'm assuming you are sensing some sort of call into pastoral ministry yourself then?
Yeah, I typically shy away from the call language. I think it's fine. I think it can be a little overly subjective. I tend to say, like with 1 Timothy 3:1, when Paul says, the man who desires to be an overseer desires a good thing. And so I talk about it like that. I say I have an aspiration or a desire for pastoral ministry. And that has been affirmed in varying degrees by my current pastors. And so I'm pursuing pastoral ministry.
Right on. So what led you to select Southern as opposed to all the other seminaries that were available to you? I know that being in the Baptist world, it probably made more logical sense to at least pick a Baptist seminary, but there are plenty of those to choose from as well. So what led you to choose Southern?
Yeah, there are. Before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about Midwestern and Southern and Southeastern, and all of which are really great seminaries. For me, Southern just made the most sense at this point in Southern Baptist seminary life. I think Southern has the most built out online program. And so they have a lot of classes recorded. And so that's why I'm doing Southern. To answer the Southern Baptist question, one, I want to be trained in the tradition that I hold to theologically. If I want to serve as a pastor at a Southern Baptist church, which I do, I find it helpful to be trained in the denominations seminaries. So there's one reason. The pragmatic reason is that because Southern Baptist churches participate in what's called the cooperative program, most seminary students, if you're a member of a Southern Baptist church, receive a 50% off tuition, stipend, scholarship, however you want to call it, whatever you want to call it. And so it makes seminary a lot more affordable, which is great. because seminary can be,
Yeah.
as I think we've said, very, very, very expensive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So why did you specifically choose to do seminary online?
Yeah, it is a kind of confluence of reasons. A lot of reasons come together. My wife is working here, and it was easy for us to stay rather than having to find another job. Another important reason, kind of going back to what I said earlier, that seminaries don't make pastors, churches make pastors. And we felt that because First Timothy 3 overwhelmingly is 1-7 is overwhelmingly concerned with character issues. I think the only thing that distinguishes a pastor from a deacon in First Timothy 3 is ability to teach. And so that's obviously important, and that's a distinguishing factor. What Paul seems really concerned about in First Timothy 3 is a godly man being a pastor. And I see, for me, being discipled and formed best in my current church context. And so, given that, and then just the way our life as a couple was taking shape, and some of the responsibilities that I had at UBC, University Baptist Church, I decided that staying would be the better option.
Have you taken any like intensive classes or gone on campus for anything at this point?
No. I've been to campus a number of times, but I've not taken an intensive.
Gotcha. Do you plan on doing that at some point?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I
Okay.
hope so.
Yeah.
So I know we're going to go back and forth here a little bit, but Kevin, I am kind of curious. Why did you do seminary back when you did seminary?
Before you answer that, can you guys explain a little bit of what intensive classes, what is that?
Yeah, intensive
entail?
classes are just basically like usually like an elective class within your degree track that is fit into, depending on the class, like a week, 2 weeks, or a couple weekends. It can depend on the degree program. It can depend on the seminary or the university, but typically those classes are for distance learners to come on to the campus and get some face-to-face education, actually be able to meet their professor and talk with them and converse with them. And so that's typically how that works. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
What was your question, Isaiah?
So I was going to ask you, as we've just asked Scott and processed through a little bit, why did you choose to go to seminary when you did?
When I did, so I was part of a residency program, kind of. I mean, they weren't really calling them that then. I'm sure we'll use that language for about 10 years and then it will be out of popularity within the church world. But I agree with Scott in a lot of ways. I mean, I was getting a lot of pastoral ministry experience from the pastoral staff that of the church I was attending, a member of and a leader in. And having, felt a call to pastoral ministry and spending much time in prayer about that, both with the elders of my church and other people in my life that knew me. It seemed like church planning was probably going to be that route. I was really young. And so at the request of the elders, they just kind of said like, hey, you need to go to seminary just for some sort of like accreditation because you're so young. That was the primary reason for them at the time. We didn't have any like strong affiliation with seminary culture or like seminary being a necessity within like our little network of church planning that we kind of had at the time. But it was certainly something that my pastor and the elders of that church saw as something that they felt would be valuable for me moving forward in ministry, if nothing else from a credibility standpoint.
Did you go in person or did you?
I did most of mine distance. So, this was, we're talking 15 plus years ago. Distance then was a lot different than it is now. I mean, so Liberty, however, was on the forefront of doing online seminary and doing it well. Like they were one of the first seminaries to do that well. However, I only lived about an hour and 15 minutes from Liberty. So I kind of did like a hybrid thing. Most of my classes were distance, but I could go down there and do the hybrid thing relatively easily and it not be a ton of work for me. But the majority of mine was distance as well. I will say seminary is uniquely designed, in my opinion, to allow online and distance learning to not be that big of a hindrance, just because a lot of seminary, in my experience and from people that I've known, I don't know if Scott would concur, is you just read a lot and then you read more after that.
Yeah. And then some writing.
Yes. Right. Which none of that necessitates you needing to be in person. So I did enjoy my in-person classes, but it certainly wasn't a necessity, at least in my degree track for sure. So
Yeah. And it may just be helpful to even just clarify, seminary, all seminary is graduate level theological education for pastors or for people who want to be involved significantly in church ministry. So it'll be a lot of reading. It'll be a lot of writing. There will be tests. It's school. But yeah.
I got really good at paper writing by the end of my time in seminary.
Yeah, no, but that's great. That helps make for great or better, more crisp, clear, focused sermons.
Spoken like a true English major in undergrad, unlike me in the STEM field.
What was your undergrad in?
My undergrad was a kinesiology.
Okay.
So, and then I had a business minor attached to it. So I was about as pragmatic and STEM as you could get. And so we very rude awakening for me. So.
We are definitely opposite ends of the academic spectrum then.
Yeah. What is one thing you wish you had known before you had started seminary?
So I think if I had thought better, put more thought into prioritizing intensives and on in-person classes, and went in with this is how I will get on campus and make classes more enjoyable, I think that would have been a better thing to have done. I've had a lot of friends go through seminary. All of my pastors have gone through seminary. So I had a decent pulse on what seminary would offer and how it would offer it. So I had a decent sense of kind of what I was going to be getting out of it. Online education, it's new. It's new. It's very new. It's changing all the time. And it is in some ways inferior to in-person education. And so having a more thoughtful plan on attending in person and being a little bit more involved in person, I think would be beneficial, and is something I'm currently considering how to optimize and change.
Scott, this is I'm building this up like it's a very deep question. It's not.
What's your favorite color, Scott?
It's burgundy, clearly. No. So while I know you haven't completed your degree track, so there's probably room for this question to be answered differently, maybe at the end than you would answer it now. But so far with the courses that you've gotten to complete, is there a specific area of ministry that maybe you think you'd wish they would have explored more deeply in your current curriculum?
I think I would love a more heavy emphasis on the church. I think you study the ecclesiology, what's called the doctrine or the study of the church, for about a week or 2 weeks in a systematic class. And I think for pastors, people who are interested in serving the church and administering the reality of Christ to his people, having a more healthy, more biblical understanding of what the church is. What is it that we do when we gather on Sunday mornings? What is it that we do when we preach? What is it that we do when we elect elders or deacons or deaconesses? Or what is the theological or biblical significance to all of these things? I think it's not as explicit and maybe not as central as I think it should be to kind of good theological pastoral curriculum. So
Is
the pastoral ministry class I took was a great class and I really enjoyed it, but it was practical, which is great and very important, but it was a little outdated on it was, hey, here's how to write a thank you note to this was part of the class. Here's how to do this. Like, I would have loved if the class had been, here's the theology that we bring to bear on a funeral. Here's the theology that we bring to bear when we preside over a wedding.
Yeah.
Here's what pastoral visitation should look like. Here's what the scriptures that we think about when we think about home visits, things like that. So I think that's how I'd answer that.
Do when you think about, well, let me ask this question. Does your degree track have any sort of like organizational management classes or anything like that in it?
There will be, yes, there are going to be 2 classes on basically that kind of Christian leadership, and then I think leadership in the local church is another class.
Gotcha. Okay, but you haven't taken those yet?
No, not yet.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that though, because that is something that I think was, and obviously I didn't get an MDiv, but was deficient in my own seminary education, and one of the things that I think has been one of the most trying things in my ministry has not necessarily been the pastoral or maybe what we would even consider like theological side of the pastorate, but the actual like management and leading a growing, for lack of a better term, organization. I mean, obviously theologically, we wouldn't call the church an organization in and of itself.
Right.
I think it's alive and living and it's the body of Christ, but there are organizational management aspects to it, and certainly something I've had to bolster on my own post seminary to be able to face the reality of witnessing to more people, pastoring more people, shepherding more people. So I'm glad to hear that's part of what you're experiencing with Southern. Where have you seen seminary help you grow as a follower of Jesus?
I think one of the things I do love about all of the professors is that they are incredibly godly men who are really interested in. So I think of like a man like Tom Schreiner. I take New Testament too with Tom Schreiner, and I think how eager he is to press all of what Scripture, so the New Testament says, into our hearts, so that we love God and His people more. And so when I think about what it means to, or how seminary has helped me follow Christ, it has helped me to connect head and heart in really significant ways. I actually think that a common trope or stereotype rather, stereotype's a better word. A common stereotype is that seminary students are kind of priggish, arrogant, puffed up. And that's certainly true. There are plenty who are that way. There are also plenty of people who are, anti-seminary and are very similar. But I've mostly found a lot of pastors or elders or professors who are also pastors and who are really concerned about discipling their students and pushing them into the life of the local church rather than abstracting them. And so for me, what's been helpful is how these men so quickly and eagerly connect all of what God intends us to know about Himself into our hearts, and how that overflows in very significant, meaningful ways into the church that I'm a part of. So,
do you think being able to stay in your home church has helped that in some ways?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That makes sense. Have there been ways in which seminary has been detrimental to you or your family or your ability to minister, would you say?
Yeah. I am sure the answer to that is yes. I have been very intentional, and my pastors have been very intentional in ensuring that seminary does not come first. By nature, I am somebody who school does come first for me. And so I do have the tendency or the propensity to hole up and abdicate ministry responsibilities because I want to read more, or I want to study more, or I want to write this really cool paper that I'm really interested in. And those are fine things to do. Those are requisite parts of seminary. But my pastors have done a very good job making sure that my loves are in the right order, that my church, my wife, my family, my own relationship with the Lord are all more significant than seminary.
That's good. That's good.
That's a good word.
So I love that you brought up the idea that sometimes the misconception that people will have of individuals who go to seminary, and I would say this is pretty common with people in academic circles in general, can be that, oh, that person has to be very arrogant or big-headed, right? And I think that's kind of part of the territory. It is very tempting, I would assume, to maybe know something that somebody else doesn't know and assume that makes you either better or smarter or whatever it is than another individual. So you're actually one of the few friends that I have who have
period.
David doesn't have any friends.
That's it. Just period.
Just here and a sentence. Let's cut the show there.
No, I'm kidding. David has many friends. He's very popular.
Yeah.
But well, let me finish that sentence.
I thought you did.
Of the friends that I have known who have gone to seminary, whom I have not seen that be the case. I feel like I have a lot of friends in kind of these two camps. One that go to seminary and just assume that they know everything that ever existed and ever was of religion, and you're insane for reading that translation of the Bible or whatever, anything that you disagree with them, right? Or just to the other
Message only, right?
Stop. You're gonna get me in trouble. And then I feel like
David, do you like the message?
No.
I like Eugene Peterson. I will say that.
Eugene Peterson is fan.
I did read
You
guys are gonna get me off track.
Sorry, man. Well, he just gets so mistreated because of maybe some unhelpful things he said.
Yeah.
And the message is not great.
Yeah.
But I mean, you want to think really well about pastoral ministry. Eugene Peterson's the guy.
He's written some fantastic books on spiritual formation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. Sorry, David.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I was gonna say that there's these kind of like two camps, or then there's just people who like get super burnt by the academic circle in seminary, and they come out and they're like, I don't want anything to do with reading or academics or I just want like kind of these two extremes.
Yeah.
So I would say you, and then I would say obviously Kevin is a good example of this as well. Are people who've gone and navigated through seminary and have reaped, I would say, the benefits. Because I was talking to Scott about this before that even though Kevin is not the world's greatest proponent for seminary, I think he has a very even keel view of it, which we'll probably explore in a few of the questions coming. I think as a church, there's a lot of benefits that we reap that we're like, I'm glad Kevin has that vision or that understanding that gives us clarity as a church that maybe he wouldn't have had if he hadn't been pushed in that direction. So how do you as a seminary student currently navigate that so that you combat kind of like that human natural instinct to think less of others, maybe because you might know more academically?
So I mean, the obvious first answer is prayer. I think if the study itself is not devotional, if the study is aimed at anything other than knowing the glory and beauty of Jesus Christ as God has revealed himself to us, it's pointless. So sanctifying or hallowing that work with prayer, that study with prayer is fundamental. But I think, and I sound like a broken record. I'm happy to sound like a broken record. I think living purposefully and intentionally in the life of your local church will disabuse you of any notion that, knowing this very idiosyncratic, obscure fact of church history is going to make you a better Christian. Because when you are on Sunday morning serving with a woman who's 90 years old and who is picking up heavy babies so that she can free up someone else to hear the word of God preached on Sunday morning, you see that kind of humility and service, and the Lord uses that to break you of the person you think you are when you absorb that information. You see that information is meant to make you look like this woman, and if it's not, you're wasting your time. You're wasting everyone else's time. So I think seeing that woman and seeing those people serve and make little of themselves to make much of Christ has been helpful, and it's rebuked me time and time again. It does all the time.
So it sounds like you being heavily involved in the local church has been a great gift of and means of grace from the Lord to protect maybe your propensity to lean into pride in that area.
Oh, absolutely. And I think if there's really one thing I could say to anybody who's listening, I think if you want to be a pastor or you want to serve in pastoral ministry, but you're not meaningfully involved in a local church, you're fooling yourself, and you're going to do a lot of damage to the eventual congregation that you may come to serve. So if you want to be a pastor, serve in the nursery. If you want to be a pastor, help with setup and tear down. If you want to be a pastor, lay down your life for your family, your friends, and your church. You will be a poor pastor unless you do those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's probably the $1 million question, right? Of anybody, if they somehow came across this through a search about seminary or just our regular listeners, but they're probably wondering. So would you recommend seminary to someone who is wrestling with, as you worded it, right, a desire to do the ministry, right? Why or why not?
Yeah. The question's a difficult one because it's general, and you always, in those situations, those counseling advice situations, you want the particularities. So I would want to drill down a little bit and get a better understanding of, well, so you have an aspiration for pastoral ministry. Does anybody else in your life want you to pursue pastoral ministry? So I think that would really be the first question I would ask. I would just say, hey, what do your pastors think? Do your pastors know? When I was much younger than I am now, not that I'm old, but when I initially felt the desire for pastoral ministry, I went to talk to my pastor, and I said, hey, I really want to go do this residency, which, by the way, that word is still in vogue, Kevin. So I think we're going to get a good 15, 20 years off of it. I went and I talked to him, and he said, oh, you're going to be a pastor. Do your elders know? And I kind of like stepped back and was like, what do you mean, do my elders know? He's like, well, elders make pastors. Pastors train pastors. So which pastor is training you to be a pastor? And I was like, no one. I thought it was just me and my Bible. So the short answer to your question is I just would want more data. I would want more information. If Kevin, if there's someone in your congregation who says, hey, Kevin, I really want to be a pastor, and you see a lot of fruit in their life, and you see that the Lord is growing them, that people seem blessed by their ministry, I would say sure. But I would also want to consider a lot of other factors. Can you stay? Can you do online seminary and stay at Aletheia and keep serving? Or are you single and you can just kind of up and move and make things really easy and just go? So there are a lot of things to consider. I would just say, if anyone is interested in doing that, go talk to your pastor, go talk to your elder, and allow them to look into your life, see if you meet the qualifications of 1 Timothy 3, 1-7, and ask a lot of questions.
Yeah. How would you respond to someone like me who finds, the cynic in me is going to come out here for a second, but finds seminary to be overpriced in most instances and also delivers on what it offers students?
Yeah. I would say, depends on who's asking. So if you were asking me and you said, hey, Scott, what do you think about seminary being overpriced? I would say, depending on how your church government is set up, you should put in the line item for your budget X amount of dollars every year to help subsidize theological education for you or someone in your congregation who wants to pursue theological education. So it is expensive, but if the church's job is to train up pastors, as I think it is, I think Acts 20, Ephesians 4, 1 Timothy 3, all of those kind of point to the fact that pastors are the church's jurisdiction. I would say that pastors then should pony up, put a little bit of money, and help somebody who's interested in going to seminary go to seminary. Now, it may not be seminary. There are a number of other, small. I think of Davenant Institute over in South Carolina. They do all of their stuff online. It's a fantastic program. It's going to be a little bit more rigorous. It's more steeped in the kind of magisterial Protestant Reformed tradition. So if that's kind of your bend, go check them out. Or Greystone Institute, or you could get a certificate through Midwestern. It doesn't always have to be an MA. It doesn't always have to be an MDiv. I think the MDiv is the gold standard, but it doesn't always have to be that. Earlier on, Kevin, you were talking about your experience, your kind of your initial advice into going to seminary, and they were mostly like, "Hey, you're young, you need credentials." That's a lamentable thing, but the fact is, most churches are going to want to see an MDiv, or they're going to want to see, they're called the Roman papers for a reason. You need your papers to be able to say, "Hey, look, I did my time." It's not a great system, but most churches are beholden to it. And so if you're wanting to apply to churches, you're not going to get in the door, unfortunately, unless you have the proper stuff. Now, that can be mitigated if, again, you have someone in your congregation that you know and trust, and you say, "Look, hey, the guy's super godly. He's a great teacher. He loves God's word. He loves the church. He's plenty intelligent enough. He can do exactly what Paul commands Timothy to do in 2 Timothy 2:15. He can rightly divide the word of truth. Let's make him a pastor. Let's raise him up to be a pastor." So you can always do that. And I think that's honestly preferable. I think churches should raise up pastors from within and not just send them out, though you can and should do that when you're thinking about church planting and helping churches in the area. But anyways, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would add because I know Scott pointed to this idea that there's a lot of resources out there, which we were talking about in the almost like the production meeting for this. There's a lot of great resources out there. I know you pointed out certificate programs at Midwestern. I know Midwestern has like for the church series on like the Trinity, Old Testament, New Testament, like a lot of these things just free and available, where I would hope anybody who's listening and maybe falls into that camp that you were pointing to, Scott, where you're like, I physically can't, either financially or either time-wise, I can't commit to an MDiv or something like that. There's a lot of options to kind of expand and grow in your knowledge of scripture and theology and in preparation, regardless.
Yeah, actually, I think one of my biggest, and part of this may be the church planter poverty mentality that I have just because of my church planting experience and background. Seeing just the way that the world has changed even in the last 10 years, but really the last 20, towards more online resourcing and just more access to things. I'm finding it harder and harder to recommend seminary to people with the upfront cost and whatever else that's going there, unless they have a desire to go into academia. Then obviously, for me, 100% of the time, like, hey, look, if you're interested in academia, you need to go. Now, there's a different set of questions that should be asked there, because you're probably, depending on what in academia you want to do, you probably need to do seminary, but you probably also will need to get some sort of master's or doctorate degree at a liberal arts university as well. Otherwise, you won't be very attractive in academia, unfortunately. The same way that you were explaining earlier, Scott, that many churches have that, hey, you have to have that MDiv next to your name to be considered for this position or whatever else. I am interested to see, and obviously this is where we're talking now and what ifs. I am interested to see if 10 years from now, if that's going to be as important.
I don't think it will be. I
Right.
think I think I think COVID has exposed a lot of the cracks in higher education. And I actually think that most theological education, there will still be a centralized location. So I don't think Southern Baptist Theological Seminary is going to lose its infrastructure. I think it's going to have a nice plot of land, the beautiful campus that it has. But I think there's going to be more of a push to local theological education. And I think this is important. And actually, this is the niche that I hope to fill, is doing theological education in the local church. And if that looks like a certificate or whatever through, Southern or Midwestern, or partnering with Southern Baptist seminaries and getting credit for teaching classes at my local church.
Yeah.
I think that's where things are going to start going.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great thing, because again, I think that puts the ball back in the court of the local churches and local church pastors to do exactly what Paul tells Titus to do: teach sound doctrine and rebuke those who teach false doctrine.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I think to your second part of your question about under delivering, I think it's tough, and I think that's actually where pastors can be really helpful, to come alongside those guys who are in seminary and encourage them to continue to put a lot in, because seminary, you're going to get out a lot of what you put in. So if you take advantage of all the supplementary reading and you work hard, right, again, going back to 2 Timothy 2:15, Paul says that we're to work hard. We're to show ourselves approved by God. We're to work hard. Ministry is hard. Studying is difficult. Being a pastor is not easy. Preaching is difficult. Discerning what Scripture says can be difficult. And so learning being equipped to study God's word is hard work. And I think seminary is a great resource to invest in and to be trained how to be a good pastor, to be a better pastor.
So with both of you kind of having this experience of online learning, and specifically you spoke about this, Kevin, with regards to theological learning being almost like a perfect match, not that those were the words you said, but a good match to online learning versus in person. What are some of the different challenges that come with just online learning in seminary versus maybe a more traditional setting? Because I think you both have that experience with your undergrads being in person, and then seminary. What are maybe some of the areas where you're like, seminary was more beneficial online because of this, or more difficult? What are some of those?
I would just say, for me, I don't know if you experienced this or not, Scott. I think when you are in specifically like systematic theology classes, of course, when I was doing it, we didn't have things like Zoom or whatever else. So I don't know if you guys have that now, Scott, for some of your classes or not. But most of like our interactive stuff with the class was like done like in a message board format when I was doing it. I viewed that as a very inappropriate way to discuss nuanced theology. I tend to lean much more probably Reformed Baptist than my seminary did, and the average attender did in my seminary classes. So I was usually seen as being like out on the fringe in a lot of my views and how I was approaching things. Now, the way that was good for me is I was getting challenged a lot, so it forced me to really know what I believed. It forced me to get into the word and figure out what the word really said, and use the tools that I had both from Greek and Hebrew classes, but amongst other things, to really kind of wade into some of that. I will say, however, and this is just a much bigger discussion. We could even talk about how pastors approach social media and things like that. Not being able to have a discussion with somebody where you can read body language, tone, or whatever makes having those types of discussions really, really difficult, and also makes I think even navigating, like my major thesis paper was centered around the idea of original sin and depravity coming through the line of Adam. I mean, federal headship, right? Again, not something Baptists are always super excited to talk about, right? But something I
The
think
early Baptists were. You're in good company. Don't worry.
I assure you, in 2009 at Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary, there weren't a ton of people that were excited about that. But anyway, I wrote an entire paper on that. Just even navigating the nuances with my professor as I was preparing that paper over the course of my 2 semesters in those classes or whatever else, just made that more difficult. So there is certainly that aspect where I would say that is a deficiency in, whether you want to call it the learning process, the experience, or whatever else it may be. I am confident that being in person would have made that a much more pleasant and probably, for lack of a term, an enjoyable experience.
No, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I think that is a deficiency of the online model. Discussion board posts, that they're not sufficient.
Right.
Now, there's really not, I don't know a way around that. Some of my classes have done videos, and those are maybe a little bit better because you get some of that body language you were getting at. But I think you're exactly right. The worst, seminary unsupervised by men who just want to do it because it sounds really cool and sounds really good. They will go through seminary and they will, frankly, they'll become people who have almost no social intelligence, and they make for really bad pastors. Ones who don't know how to look for body language, don't even think to look for body language, and they don't recognize that while talking about, original sin or federal headship, they realize that the woman that they're talking to may have lost a child in the womb, and this conversation is difficult for her. And so in that moment, you're just interested in proving the point. You're just interested in, how Jonathan Edwards is maybe a little bit weird on original sin and imputation, but you don't see this woman who's suffering, and that's a deficiency. That's a negative part about, that can be a negative part about seminary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Online.
Yeah. So, thank you so much for all that insight. I know that's like, I don't want to end it there, but as much as to ask one last question, is there anything that you would like to add, just as you've been thinking through this and processing through this when we reached out, that you think would just be really helpful for anyone listening? Maybe as people who listen are considering, like we talked about earlier, or whatever that may be.
Yeah, I think just to maybe sum up, I think seminaries don't make pastors. They can help make a better pastor, but churches make. I'm making red beans and rice, and my timer just went off. So I've never made red beans and rice before.
Oh, wow.
Seminaries don't make pastors. They help supplement pastors and pastoral ministry. Churches make pastors. So if you want to pursue pastoral ministry, go talk to your pastors. Go talk to your elders. I think some people will say that seminary is not important because we have a lot of resources. People can just look things up and read, and that's absolutely true. But the reality is not all people have the constitution to just go and devour books. A lot of people need their hands held through Jonathan Edwards. I do. I mean, I certainly do. I have no idea. Sometimes when I read Jonathan Edwards, I'm like, there's no way this is actually English. But I'm like, what do you mean that like solidity is just resistance? Like, what is that even? What are you talking about? I don't know what that means. And so I'm not going to go read, some of that stuff if I don't have somebody, a pastor or someone who's gone through theological education to help walk me through some of the more obscure parts of the theological tradition. So some people need help, and that's a good thing. And that's part of what seminary is there for. Churches can't do everything realistically. Churches have a lot of things going on. Hopefully, churches can grow in the things that they're able to do, but church just can't do everything. Just even from a practical resource standpoint, they can't oversee everything. And so seminaries can be helpful, but I think that the way forward is for seminaries and pastors, local church pastors, to build relationships, to build better relationships, and for the pipeline not to just be, okay, hey, we outsource all of the theological education. So you want to learn how to be a theologian? Go away. Basically, that's the wrong model. Keeping the theologian in-house, training the person that to understand that theology is for the church. Sound doctrine is for the church. It's for the health of the church. And so keeping that in-house. So if you can stay and you want to stay, you're meaningfully involved in your local church, talk to your pastor and stay and do online and recognize that there will be trade-offs. But I think in the end, if you want to do pastoral ministry, it's going to serve you really well.
Yeah. Kevin, as we've included you in this conversation as well, is there any little notes you'd like to add at the end as well?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree with anything that Scott's saying. I think that the biggest area that we would agree on would be this type of decision should be one that's made with the confirmation of elders and pastors and other people in your life. I think, at least in my experience, I met a number of people who were just doing seminary because they wanted to do ministry. And so
Yep.
that was what that was their ticket to doing it. And I think they were doing themselves a disservice.
Yep.
I think the seminary was doing them a disservice by not maybe putting some parameters for them to kind of have over their lives to get there. And then, if a church later on down the line was going to hire them, obviously the biggest disservice was going to be to the men and women who attended that church, because
Yep.
you had someone that likely was not, whether it's emotional intelligence or spiritual maturity or whatever it may be, was not equipped and ready to be able to walk into that, even though they had the accreditation, maybe from a theological standpoint at the seminary level. And so, I do think this is something that I think I've even seen from seminaries in the last 5 to 6 years of hey, how do we marry seminary education to our theology of the local church? And I love that's what you were talking about that at the beginning, Scott, like just this idea of ecclesiology and being taught that and how important that is. I think that is super, super important, because if someone has a proper understanding of the role of the local church, and specifically, if you feel a desire to do the work of the ministry and to go into it vocationally in some way, from the design by which God has instituted the local church to be a system of checks and balances and accountability to you in that, and that there's been authority placed over you.
That's right.
Biblically.
Yep.
By the chief shepherd, that you need to be leaning into that. And I think online, it would still even be my preferable model to people if they were going to go the seminary route, because I think that highly of the authority of the local church in the life of a local, of a believer. It's really, really hard to lose that and be stepping into that arena.
Yep.
I mean, one thing I don't think we even talked about today, and we don't have time to, but it's just the idea of spiritual warfare while we're in seminary. Yeah. It's very real. I mean, I think a great thing for you, Scott, is you have your pastors and you have people that know you, that are there to help you when you're reading something that's really difficult, or you've read some obscure theologian who's maybe a little off the reservation, and you're like, what the heck am I reading right now?
And there are plenty.
Right. And have I wasted the last 6 years of my life, or whatever it may be, doing this, having people there to ground you back in Apostles' Creed level Christianity is so important. And so, that's enough rambling for me, but thank you, Isaiah.
I think that's great. I'm sorry if I could actually recommend a few books for any interested listeners who maybe want to think about this stuff a little bit more. Jeremy Rennie has a book called Church Elders. It's in the 9 Marks. So hold on, let me unblur. It's
Put
in
it
the
in
9
your
marks of a healthy
Got that
church
book for
series.
$2.99.
It's at Crossway.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think Church Elders is really great. It's going to help you walk through 1 Timothy 3, 1-7. It's going to talk about the job description of a pastor, how scripture talks about that. I think Bobby Jameson's book, The Path to Being a Pastor, is, for my money, one of the best books I've read on preparing for pastoral ministry and how to think about it both biblically and practically. And then I don't know where I put it, but The Christian Ministry by Charles Bridges. He was a 19th century Anglican, so the language is going to be a little bit dated. But if you read Charles Dickens in high school, you'll be just fine. It's really, really good. So I would recommend those 3 books to read with a friend, read with a pastor, and continue thinking about your own aspirations for pastoral ministry.
Absolutely. Yeah, Scott, thank you so much for joining us and just giving us insight into your life as well as your perspective. I think it was really, really helpful, and I hope it will be helpful for all of you listeners out there and viewers, because we do have this on YouTube as well. If you want to see some really cool stuff, head that way too. And thanks for joining us. We look forward to our next episode in a couple weeks, where we continue our series through answering skeptics. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, all the things that people tell you to do when they're on a podcast or something. So I trust you guys can do that pretty well. And we hope that you guys can share it so that others can be encouraged and uplifted by these conversations. So with that, we're so glad you guys listened, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Go and be the church.
Brief question. Am I allowed to ask questions back?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you're allowed.
There's lots of engagement here.
You're allowed to create a full-blown fight and debate if you want.
Kevin is
Isaiah won't respond, but
David and I will. So
I will
Isaiah
try to be
cower
the
behind
peacemaker in this conversation.
Isaiah
I may join you, Isaiah, on the peacemaker side.
Perfect. I like Scott already.